Right. Katie, do you want to get us going?
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the call. I think we're expecting fewer people today, because today is actually a holiday that's observed in a number of European countries, and African countries as Labor Day. So we may not be as big of a group, but that's okay. You're all here, so that's great. And our purpose today, if Conte wants to move to the next slide, but our purpose today is fairly singular in that the Global Fund board met last week in Geneva, and we wanted to invite and had invited our colleagues from different delegations to the Global Fund Board to join us today and to give us a bit of a debrief of what happened. Before I invite them to take the floor, I'm just going to cover just an overview of sort of what was on the agenda of the board meeting, and then pass it over to them. So as always, GFAN was invited as an observer to the Global Fund Board. Conte and I participated virtually this time, and our colleague Priyanka attended in person in Geneva. This is very much the same slide that you saw just before the board meeting in terms of, from our perspective as GFAN, what we expected to be sort of the key issues that were going to be raised for input or information. It did feel a little bit like going into this board meeting, the decision points weren't going to be the ones that were going to cause the most discussion, or perhaps not contention, but maybe some sort of disagreement and looking for consensus. And I think that's, as a virtual participant, that is the way that the meeting looked like. The decision points themselves, not terribly controversial or the focus of too much conversation. But that there was an awful lot of sessions that were around getting information and input from the board for issues that are quite a bit bigger and usually require a lot more conversation. And those in particular were around sort of the allocation methodology, the external review that had taken place of that, the Global Fund's own response to that, and suggestions of how to take the evaluation forward. And then the work that, sort of can be thought of as encompassing collaboration with Gavi and the Global Financing Facility, but that is sort of, if not driven, come to the forefront anyways in terms of visibility through the Lusaka agenda. There was an update from the executive director, a resource mobilization update, and I noted in red here because it was actually one that didn't seem particularly noteworthy to me in advance of the meeting, but in reviewing the documents ahead of the board meeting, there was a very interesting discussion around what's called public financial management, or PFM, which is a new acronym that I'm afraid that we're probably all going to have to use and add to our list of acronyms we need to know. But this is essentially the government system for managing resources under the oversight of the Ministry of Finance in any country, really. And the board's chief financial officer, presented on this. And it was interesting because the conversation was very much linked to both sort of conversations around co-financing and sustainability, but also around, at the previous board meeting, and I think just in general, there's been a lot of discussion around the 3 1s, one plan, one budget, one implementation. And I think that in part to respond to some of that chatter, the chief financial officer came in and talked about that in the context of how the Global Fund engages with countries' PFM, public financial management systems, and how they look for those to be built up, ahead of and during potential transition out of Global Fund sort of funding. They interestingly added a fourth one to the 3 1. So one plan, one budget, one implementation, and what they call one assurance. So sort of the system that makes sure that the public financial management system is sort of being audited regularly and overseen in a particular way. So I just wanted to mention that because I thought it was an interesting discussion, and the way that it linked to the work of the Global Fund. And it wasn't one that personally I had sort of seen coming until the discussion was taking place. And those were the decision points, which I think you can already find up on the website that have been approved. And we'll share the link where, it takes some time usually, but all with very few exceptions, of the board meeting documents are usually made public afterwards, within a month or so after the board meeting, on the Global Fund's website. So you are actually able to go and look at them at that stage if you're interested to. So just on the next slide, just wanted to approach this conversation today just a little differently than we've done these kinds of debriefs before, and just see maybe if it inspires more discussion or is a better way for our colleagues from the delegations to share sort of their reflections and debrief us all. But we sort of had three sort of main categories of sort of issues and conversations at the board meeting that had various documents and various sort of purposes behind them, and asked colleagues from the delegations, ask one to sort of present it, and then give the opportunity to the other delegations to sort of respond or add in their perspectives before moving on to another issue, as opposed to the way we've done it before, where we've just sort of asked each delegation to give us their highlights and then put that and then open it for questions. So hopefully this works, but we'll see. So we're just trying something a bit different, so bear with us a little. So we were going to ask Vitaly from the Developed Country NGO delegation to just give us, to start us off and to start the delegations off on the conversation around global disease split. And on the next slide, what I did, just so that it's in the background while Vitaly is speaking, is just give people a definition of what the global disease split is, what the current policy is, and just a really quick look at sort of how that's working out right now in the current funding cycle. So Vitaly, could I pass it over to you?
Yes, thank you, Katie, and hi, everyone. But before going into global disease split, maybe just a quick mentioning about allocation methodology in general, right? So as we know, and as we said in the debrief, pre-board meeting on GFAN, there was an independent evaluation of the allocation methodology that recommended that there should not be a separate stream for LSSH, or Resilient Sustainable System for Health, anymore. So as a delegation, we agree with this recommendation. So, and we believe that all the funds that might be very hard to raise, so this is a separate discussion. So all the funds should go rather into three diseases. As we perfectly know, all our efforts do contribute to resilient systems of health, including all the disease-specific interventions, but also community systems of health. So this is a really strong contribution of RSSH in general. On the global disease split, our delegation, we have not taken a specific position, but we continue advocating that any proposal to revise the funding model must respect the core principle of the Global Fund. We believe that any approach for the global disease split should not harm achievements in any of the disease areas that the global, in any of the three disease areas. And of course, we need to focus on how we are currently not on track for the three diseases commitments, and what tools and instruments and mechanisms are available for us to use the resources more effectively, or as effectively as possible. But of course, we as a delegation, we continue raising concern that there is not enough urgency for the TB response. TB, as malaria, actually remained severely underfunded. And that's why our delegation, the Developed Country NGO delegation, we joined the Stop TB Partnership and World Health Organization in co-hosting a side event during the board meeting on the allocation methodology and allocation scenarios for the TB, including for the TB or the global disease split. We do, as a delegation, we do not commit to any concrete figures at this stage, because the presentation came, or the suggestion for the side event came just before the board meeting started, so we didn't have a chance to elaborate in the delegation. But we absolutely welcome this discussion, and we want to hear also community perspectives from all over the world. Just a small addition on this discussion. It is really important also on the allocation methodology. We suggested that we use incidence rather than mortality for HIV, and in this sense, it is in line with our concern that allocation methodology in general is very commodity heavy, and there is not sufficient funds for prevention, human rights, and community involvement. And also, when we are talking about the TB response and the need for more resources and more attention to TB response, we continue advocating for more community involvement in the TB response. I think briefly for me at this stage. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Vitaly. And maybe, Conte, if we could just put up the next slide. I had done sort of a background, well, hopefully I got it right, on allocation and eligibility as well, where it sort of talks about some of those, what you were just mentioning, Vitaly, sorry, what you were just mentioning in terms of the way and what measures are utilized. But I'd just like to invite our colleagues from developing or communities, perhaps starting with you, Yolanda, because you already have your camera on. But is there anything that you wanted to add in terms of your delegation's perspective on sort of the issues that Vitaly just raised around the bigger sort of allocation, eligibility, global disease split, et cetera, and where we're headed?
Hi, morning, everyone. Total disclaimer, I'm still recovering from this board meeting. I have not recovered, and it's 7 a.m. here. So no, we're on the same page with Vitaly, and I think that the three delegations developed communities, we were very strong at the board table, engaging in conversation around the need for us to be able to look at the global disease split in a very precise way. I wanted to add that we all supported the fact that TB needs to be increased in the global disease split. And I think walking away from the board meeting, the guidance was that the Global Fund Secretariat and Stop TB need to work together to show us some more of those modeling scenarios to see what would actually work. Because of course, the point of allocation and eligibility is all linked into replenishment and what would the replenishment look like. You know, these are not separate topics. And so we were all discussing that at the board table in terms of, well, we don't know what we'll get with replenishment, but if we use the last replenishment as a baseline, this is what we can do. And so we really wanted guidance from the Global Fund Secretariat as to what those modeling scenarios would look like with the three diseases. And of course, Stop TB would support the modeling for TB to show us what it would look like. So I just wanted to add that to what Vitaly was saying. Anything else on allocation methodology? Let me just quickly see. Yeah, so from our delegation, we were also highlighting the fact that the suggested allocation that was presented for the board would not allow us to reach all of the people in need. And so as we go into GC8, as we go into replenishment, we need to really think about our global partnerships and continue to be ambitious in our thinking, but also be grounded in what is happening in country and how do we maximize on the gains, as Vitaly said, and we don't lose on the work that we have done. We supported the evaluation recommendation that the global disease split be revised in favor of TB. We have supported that, and we also supported the event that Stop TB Partnership had put on, showing us the different scenarios. We really highlighted at the board that even as we talk about global disease split and allocation methodology, that HIV, TB, and malaria does not occur in isolation. One individual can get all three in the same body. And so we have to, as we move forward, continue to focus on people-centered approaches, even in our thinking about allocation methodology. And despite allocation, whatever allocation methodology that we have decided on across the three diseases, we as a delegation, we're insisting that we cannot and we must not reduce catalytic investments. Catalytic investments are supremely important. We see the reach and impact on the ground through our multi-country grants. multi-country grants can reach countries, smaller countries and smaller regions, and we can reach the people on the ground through multi-country grants. And it also helps us address human rights challenges as well. So we're not we're not negotiating on catalytic investment. It must be ramped up. And I do think, personally, my sense coming out of the board meeting, and Vitaly, you can tell me if I'm wrong, that there seemed to have been general understanding, agreement, and consensus that we can't not ramp up our catalytic investments in our next replenishment. We have to pump a lot of money there. So I think that's it in summary. Just what was discussed in summary. There are a lot of things that will still be discussed, things that are not yet decided. It's a rolling ball going on right now. And a lot more conversation that will be happening at the board level before we come to the next board meeting in November. So I'll leave it there on allocation and eligibility, Katie.
Thanks, Yolanda. I appreciate it. And just noting that the communities delegation was invited to the call today. Maureen, who is the communications focal point, has joined us. And Maureen, without putting you too much on the spot, because I expect you haven't recovered probably from last week either. But did you have anything that you'd like to add from the communities delegation perspective on this part of the discussion?
Yes, Katie. Thank you so much. Sorry, I won't put my video on because of the flood issues. Our network is not very stable, and also power blackout, so I'm using my phone. So I'll just add. I mean, I want to agree with what Vitaly and the developing have said. That we align in most of those positions around these issues, so I will not repeat. I just also want to add that besides what we discussed at the board table, we had bilaterals, and we recognize as a constituency that even in GC6, we all acknowledged that TB had been grossly underfunded, and there was need for revision. So we were having conversations with mostly the donor constituencies, asking them what their take is in terms of the global disease splits and why they would or would not support a new split. And so some of them in fact, a good number of them are of the thought that we should retain the pattern we used at GC6, where we maintain the global disease split as they are until a certain amount of money, for example, 12 billion or 14 billion, and then any additional resources mobilized would be put through a new kind of disease split that would give TB and malaria a little more. Some are also looking at the historic reasons why the disease splits were done as they were, and they don't think so much has changed. And some say that there's a lot of call for HIV, for malaria and TB as underfunded, but it's just because that the mortality rates of which people are looking at are lesser in HIV. But they say that HIV still doesn't have a cure, and if there's a reduction of the resources, then people who depend on their daily ARV doses could miss their doses and the pattern would change. So they're saying the reason HIV looks okay is because people are on ARV, but these ARVs still need to be sustained or scaled up, and therefore they wouldn't support a reduction in HIV split. So it's still COMSI, COMSA, but we supported also the use of data at the board table, and especially incidence and not prevalence, because sometimes the percentages are misleading. If we can work on numbers, then that was our recommendation. Another thing that came up was splitting it further into 4, having a standalone RSSH split. But I saw that this was rejected by a majority of the people that we met and had a conversation with. They said they didn't think that RSSH should have a standalone split, and that it should be streamlined within the disease splits. Yeah, so thank you, and over to you, Kate.
Thank you. Sorry, I just realized I don't have my video on today for some obscure reason, but there I am. Sorry about that, everyone. thank you all for that. I will open it up quickly to any questions or clarifications around what we've just been talking about before we move on to the next topic. Just to say that typically what has been done, and I think what the Secretariat was urging to be done in this before the next replenishment, was that the global disease split would be decided upon at this November's board meeting, and so discussed and between now and then, and then the conversation would flow to the rest of the allocation and eligibility conversation for decision in the spring of next year. I'm not sure it's May, but spring of next year board meeting. But there did seem to be a lot of discussion around the table about whether or not, instead of doing it sort of piecemeal, I guess is the way to think it, try and do it all together. And try to put more of that information together, which would be, I think, quite a lift for the Secretariat. So I'm not sure if there was, after we go to some of the questions from colleagues there, if any of the delegations might want to respond to that. But that was just sort of, there still seems to be a bit of, the board sort of feeling in general that they would rather look at it all together at once to see all of the different sort of scenarios, and the Secretariat, not necessarily not open to that, but it's not sort of the way they had thought that they would approach it based on previous sort of rounds of doing this. So I think there may still be a decision, or maybe the delegations can update us on that. I see two hands, so I'm going to go to Paul and then Donald, and then we'll come back to the delegations to sort of answer any of the questions. So Paul, welcome. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Katie. It's very welcome to hear from all three reporters there that there is an understanding that there is need for greater action on tuberculosis. Two related comment questions. First of all, do you get the feel that Global Fund per se, staff and leadership, accept the basic, the current global plan to end TB largely by 2030? In other words, because that's the issue of what, the great urgency to get effort into TB is if we are to achieve that ambitious target. And at the moment, we are way off being likely to achieve it. And secondly, in the past, Global Fund has tended to say, even if we started saying there could be more money for TB, we're actually short of demand, that the actual applications are not coming through at the appropriate level. And I wonder if that is still the problem, and whether there is an issue for us as GFANers to be advocating to national programs to be more ambitious.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Paul. Good questions. We'll go to Donald, and then we'll come back to the delegations. Donald, please go ahead. Donald, we can't hear you, so you may have to unmute from your end.
Thank you.
There we go.
Yeah. And thank you for the presentations. Two quick questions. Can you hear me now? Yes, video, my bandwidth is a bit low. So one is on the disease split, and thank you, Maureen, for unpacking around RSSH. But further to that, was there conversation around a specific quota for CSS within the RSSH, because CSS continues to suffer because it becomes more of a CCM conversation and it tends to be marginalized. That's number one. Number two, the conversations around dual track financing policies. What is the tech? Because it continues, we continue to have a bias towards just the government PR and not necessarily a drive towards ensuring that the CSO PR comes on board, and especially.
So I'm afraid, Donald, if you could, we heard your first part of your question about conversation around, sort of a quota for CSS within RSSH, but not the second part. If you're able to use the chat to add that part of your question, please do that. Sorry. And just noting that Pernilla also has a question in the chat, but we can come back to that. And then maybe, I'm not sure who wants to attack this first, Yolanda and Maureen. are still recovering. Vitaly probably is too. It's early, but Vitaly, did you want to lead us off in this one for some responses?
Yeah, if I may, and then Yolanda, Maureen, please continue. On the Secretariat's position, I think, and this is my personal view, that it's not the Secretariat who is driving the whole discussion about the global disease split, right? So they are really supportive on this. And every time that we as a Global Fund Partnership are speaking now about achievements, the very first thing is about the great bounce back of TB programs after COVID-19, right? So this is an achievement that Secretariat is also very happy to take on board. But it is, as Yolanda mentioned, it is about now discussion about funding. And yeah, in the current GDS formula, we had this formula that if we would raise more than 18 billion, the more funds would go to TB. That did not happen. So now we heard in all the bilaterals, but also at the board table from almost most of the donors, that there will be really challenging time this time around, even to reach the same level of in the replenishment. So now it's all around this, and I think so this, there are so many positions and many unclarities in the positions from the all board delegations. So I think this will be really hard thing for us to agree on. In terms, this is my my position, my opinion on the ambitions. I don't think we need to be worried about it. Lucico was really clear at the table that there are ambitions from the TB response, and there are really good applications this time around. But again, because of the not sufficient funds even now in GC7, many of the important things ended up into unqualified quality demand. Yeah, for now. Yolanda, Maureen.
Yeah, Katie, if I may, I'm not jumping. I hope I'm not jumping. Just very quickly. Yeah, Vitaly, thank you for that. And I think what is very important, I want to make two comments that I hope will frame our conversation. I think everybody came to this board meeting understanding that there has to be a lot of conversation to move forward. That we are in a position where we really have to reprioritize. We really have to think about how do we get and achieve our goals, because we're nowhere near our targets for any of the 3 diseases. Nowhere near. And so I also want to stress that, we trust the secretariats, because the secretariat works on our guidance as a board, and they are working to ensure that they can produce the scenarios and the models and give us the risks and provoke the thinking for us as we determine how we realign and how we try to meet our targets for 2030. The same thing is, Paul, I hear you loud and clear. Lucica was very clear at the board meeting about what is needed for TB, the targets, the applications that have come in processes. She's driving that, and she was heard loud and clear at that table. And I want to reiterate Vitaly's point about everything is determined on the funding. And I know people would have questions about what donors are feeling, where donors want to go, and that is conversations that I think we're still having at the board table. Donors are trying to figure out for themselves, well, where do they align? Where is the best way to invest their money, and how that would look from their end. I am not trying to speak for them. I'm not making any decisions for them, but I'm just sharing the ongoing thinking that we're having as a board. The other thing that I would say is, I think it was Donald. I didn't get your last question. But I think the first one was about a specific quota for community system strengthening and RSSH. If I got you correctly, please forgive me. So we don't have RSSH, a track for RSSH, but remember that community system strengthening is happening in various ways across the grants, across the 3 diseases. But that conversation about a specific quota for CSS, and can you guys mute? Thank you. That particular conversation around a specific quota for CSS, there's no decision around it, no discussion around it as yet. It's an evolving conversation. And I think your last part of your question, Donald, was about dual track financing. It's one of the strategies that we, particularly as developing country NGO, continue to advocate for, because we keep saying we need to figure out ways now at this juncture to invest more in our civil society and our communities to allow them to do more work on the ground. One of those strategies could be dual track financing. Another strategy could be ramping up our multi-country grants. Another strategy could be having a CSO as a PR. We don't know. We have suggested the strategies, but those strategies have to come with conversation around risks, about how it would happen on the ground, about how we would ensure that our communities and CSOs are getting the resources to do the work on the ground. Those are conversations that we need to have. I didn't know the end of your question, but I kind of preempted it, I guess, a little bit. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Thanks, Yolanda. Appreciate it. And just over to Maureen, if there was anything she'd like to add at this point.
Yeah, so I agree with Yolanda, and I agree with Yolanda on the role of the Secretariat in the whole conversations that were happening. And I think, like she said, they will take in the different views and try and model something that the board can then discuss. We are very supportive of what Stop TB is doing around modeling for an increased allocation for TB. And our constituency promised to continue working with Stop TB Partnership to find a solution for the TB grants. I remember in one of the bilaterals, someone even said that countries do not absorb everything they get, and therefore portfolio optimization should go to TB. But someone said that part of that portfolio optimization is usually TB money that has not been spent. So the question around absorption also came in this conversation. So for the issue of CSS, our constituency also acknowledged that when RSSH resources go to country, they are mostly focused on health systems and not community systems. There's always a struggle. Communities still have to struggle to get a piece of the RSSH allocation, both in the COVID-19 and in the main grants. And so we also asked for a conversation in the coming board meetings of a specific percentage for CSS within the RSSH, in case it will still be a standalone allocation. We also had a struggle with what is invested in RSSH because our health systems are still weak despite the many years of investments in RSSH. And therefore, the question was around, is it really invested in the strengthening of the systems, or are we using it to maintain the current broken system in form of running costs? Because some of the investments go to vehicles and, the daily running costs that may not really strengthen the systems for the people who need to use those systems. So we had even asked for a breakdown on actually an overview of what is really spent on RSSH. And it is so shocking. And I know if that is done, it will be very shocking how much goes to community systems strengthening. Yeah, so yeah, that's over. Back to you, Katie.
Thank you so much. Just noting for you guys, if you're able to, there are a few questions in the chat, which I think some has been answered by the comments that you've left here just now, but just in case not, just pointing you towards those. If there's anything else you'd like to say on that. I just wanted to try and move us forward a little bit. And Maureen, the allocation methodology, right? There's allocation, there's eligibility, there's global disease split, there's, and this all seems to be such a big discussion because it also sort of has ramifications for the kinds of catalytic investments that we, like as Yolanda was saying, that we typically, care about and want to advance. not all of them, but many of them, and the conversations around sustainability and transition, transitioning out of Global Fund programs. So I just wondered, just to move us forward a little bit in terms of the discussion, were there any comments that you wanted to add in particular around sort of those other elements that aren't typically like a part of the allocation policy, but are relevant and did seem to come up an awful lot at the board meeting, at least from where I was sitting on my desk at home in Canada, but around transition and sustainability. Maureen, if you could kick us off with a few thoughts, and then we'll go to the other two and again, see if there's any questions. And then we want to finalize with our sort of final theme around Lusaka agenda and the collaborations with Gavi and GFF. So Maureen, anything to add in?
Yeah. In terms of allocation methodology, we also had a conversation on catalytic investments, and we were discussing as a delegation what we really want to push in catalytic investments. We saw a lot of money going to WHO for data strengthening in countries, yet countries are also getting money for strengthening their data systems within the country. So we thought that maybe we don't want to advocate for WHO to get more money to do data in countries, but to advocate for resources for advocacy and all the missing pieces, especially around the increasing criminalization of our communities in different countries. So we thought that we really needed to step back, consult with our constituents, and really look at what exactly we want to push for in terms of catalytic investments and how we want to make it more resources for communities and civil society rather than resources for partners. And then on the issue of eligibility, we always abstain from the discussion on eligibility on principle, because our constituency feels that anyone, anywhere in the world who requires the services should be able to access the services. So we will engage in the conversation just to strengthen it, but when it comes for voting, we always abstain and not vote for or against, but it is out of principle. And then on the discussion of sustainability, we had quite some really healthy conversations around when we talk about sustainability, because it's always linked to the conversations of Global Fund around sustainability are always kind of linked to transition. And we were wondering, especially when the donors are talking about sustainability, they're always talking about, now, when do we move away? Can these countries sustain themselves quicker so that we are moving out of them? And in our bilaterals with them, we were telling them that those conversations should happen when we have seen progress. Right now, everything is breaking down because of the challenging operating environment we are all facing with the wars and the climate and whatever COVID that really affected most of our institutions, economic capacities of countries. And so we are saying that we need to ensure that the response is at a place where you can sustain. People have met maybe the 95 targets for HIV and TB, they've eliminated malaria, the communities are strengthened. And we came to that clause that says communities, epidemics begins in communities and end at the community level. So sustainability can only happen once they have strengthened those systems that are able to respond to epidemics, and also that we have met the targets, and therefore we are going to sustain those targets. And then we can have this conversation around sustainability with a thought of transition. Yeah. Over to you, Katie.
Thanks. And I just ask Yolanda and then Vitaly if they wanted to add anything else there. And then we'll, again, look to see if there's any questions or clarifications. So Yolanda?
This feels like when I was in high school and we would have our oral exams for Spanish. I didn't want to have to do this. No, it's fine. Maureen, thank you for that. Those are some excellent points that you raised. I am broad picture framing sometimes. So eligibility is a very difficult conversation, and I think a very difficult conversation that everyone at the board was tossing around because we don't know how to manage eligibility. And I want to root this conversation again in the fact that we're coming up to replenishment. And so the anxiety is around, well, what are we going to do based on what we get? So the feeling is that no matter what we get, we need to reprioritize. And how do we do that to ensure that we sustain the gains and we maintain services on the ground? So eligibility is also something I think that as a delegation, we are not steering clear of, but we have to discuss, and we need to be able to discuss in a meaningful way. And so we have not really had that conversation as a delegation at the board. The other thing I wanted to bring up, so sustainability is also rooted in the fact that every country in which the Global Fund has a grant for whichever disease, each country has several challenges, one of which is some countries don't have HIV, TB, and malaria as a big ticket priority in their country. That's number one. Number two, there are countries that are still reeling economically from everything. The pandemic, from trying to get their economic landscape back on board. Those are challenges that they're facing. And because of those challenges, we question whether countries are able to bounce back, so to speak, to be able to maintain their own and finance their own HTM responses. And I'm just sharing this because these are conversations that were happening, not just at the board table, but also partly at the retreat. And when I say conversations, I mean thinking. And then when you throw in all of these other things that we don't anticipate, like wars and humanitarian crises, and then you have ongoing human rights challenges globally, not just in a country or a region, all of those things are weakening government's responses. And so their priority is not on HTM. So one of the conversations at the board linked to sustainability, linked to how we deal with transitioning, is how do we keep HIV, TB, and malaria as important, as a health priority, as important. One of the examples that was used, and Katie, cut me off when you need to cut me off. One of the examples that was used, and I thought it was really good by Peter Sands, it was a very good example, is that it doesn't matter what a country faces, whether it is climate, whether it is a war, whether it is a human right breach, whatever. The audience, which is the people that we serve, they are the ones with the same vulnerability to everything. And so as we talk about sustainability in the context of a global fund strategy, and in the context of how do we move forward to get our 2030 goals and beyond, we have to remember that this one person, the investments we make into this one person, should be able to strengthen them and their community in a way to handle anything that's happening. Part of that responsibility comes with government ownership and political will, which is another conversation. So let me frame it like that. And I did that big framing to say there was also a conversation at the board table around our sustainability transitioning and co-financing policy. Oh my God, I told you I need more coffee. And a lot of us were saying, yeah, but we review it on what basis? We have never done an analysis of the policy and to see how it has worked. That is something that our delegation has been harping on. So what exactly are we changing? What is the baseline for changing? What are we looking at to change and in what way? So that's a conversation that I think has been hanging. And then on the other side, we have the conversation about, well, countries are just not ready. It doesn't matter the economic classifications, they're just not ready. There are very few that are ready to transition, but others that are just not ready for specific reasons. And therefore, how do we as a board manage that? And then the other thing is co-financing. Co-financing continues to be a challenge. And the conversation was around, well, and correct me, Vitaly and Maureen, if I have completely missed this, but I remember conversation around, well, what are countries co-financing? Because some countries are co-financing meds, but then they would call and they would say to the Global Fund Secretariat, well, sorry, we don't have the money for meds anymore. So we need to get the money for the nets, or we need to get the money for the meds. And so how do we hold countries accountable for what they have actually said they're going to co-finance? And so those are conversations that are happening, because one of the other conversation as well, how much pressure, we have policies. How are we implementing the policies? We need to be able to implement them in a way that allows people to be accountable for what they say they're going to do or not going to do, because that's part of the conversation around how do we move countries to own their responses. If I'm not making sense, please tell me. And the last, very, very last thing I would say, and this is a big one. So as part of sustainability is also the big ticket item, Katie, that you brought up about public finance management. Now, we have to keep our eyes on that. We have to keep our eyes on that because it is being proposed as a model. We have not decided on it. This meeting has had no decisions around these things. Please be very clear about that. And we have been engaging as 3 delegations with Ada and her team about this public finance management. What is it really going to look like when you say one plan, one budget? What does that mean on the ground for CSOs and communities? And actually, at the board table, they had shared a slide in which they showed how CSOs and communities feed into this one budget, one plan. To be very honest with you, I have not internalized it. I can't speak to it as yet. But they have presented it to us as a board for us to continue the engagement. And I know that communities supports the 3 ones. Maureen, correct me if I'm wrong. There are advantages and disadvantages to that PFM model. And we were saying at the board table that that PFM model may work for some countries, but it may not work for all. And I think where we are right now, we have to take country by country approaches to see what's going to work for each country based on modeling. I know somebody brought up modeling earlier, based on modeling scenarios for GDS, global disease split, based on modeling scenarios for co-financing and also for transitioning. I'm stopping.
Okay, that's good, because then I was going to start speaking in Spanish to see how much of it you did remember from your Spanish exams, Yolanda. But that is helpful, and I think it shows sort of the richness of the discussion at the board, right? And all of these issues are so interrelated. Yeah. So Vitaly, did you want to jump in?
Very briefly, as we are running almost out of time. But as you can see, these discussions are so interrelated: allocation, eligibility, sustainability, transitioning, co-financing. That's why we are asking the Secretariat to continue in-depth discussion on all these aspects, not like here is one allocation with GDS, here is eligibility with some qualitative adjustments. So it's really important. On transition, on sustainability, one important remark, and also it was obvious even during board retreat, which was prior to the board meeting, that each delegation actually understands sustainability differently. So we also need to have a common definition of what sustainability is. Somebody is talking about financial sustainability. Somebody is about programmatic. The other are about political. So if we don't even agree on one definition, that will be hard going forward. On eligibility, yes, it is also connected to the fears of unsuccessful replenishment. Some donors are already hinting to exclude, for example, upper middle income countries. We absolutely don't agree with this, and we pointing out that key populations in UMIX are still underserved population. And also in the whole sustainability transition and co-financing discussion, actually key populations are the first to be failed, right, along all the things. So we want to just drive this point home. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see Yolanda still has more to say.
No, I don't have more to say. I have to correct myself. Maureen and our community's delegation, forgive me for misquoting you. You are correct. The community's delegation does not support the 3 ones because we recognize that in that, and so does developing, we recognize the challenges of that PFM model in countries where key populations are criminalized. And that is one of the strong points that we raised about it. So sorry for misquoting you, Maureen. My apologies, all right?
Thanks, Yolanda. I'm sure that's appreciated. And we're going to pass the floor to you again, Yolanda, and we're actually going to switch to the last slide because we did just want to touch on the conversations around the Lusaka agenda and also around, the Global Fund's collaborations with the GFF and Gavi, which for those of us who've been following for more than a minute, We know that these institutions already collaborate in a number of important ways. And the Lusaka agenda was kind of this external conversation that seemed to take over a little bit at the board. So, but there were some interesting discussions and some interesting things said last week at the board meeting about this. And I think, and put here sort of a little bit more clearer information about how some of these collaborations will proceed and what the value of them are and how they integrate to the Global Fund's governance system, which I think had been a longstanding complaint. No, that's not the right word. Point. It was an important point that your delegations have been raising for a long time. So over to you, Yolanda, for your favorite and my favorite topic, the Lusaka agenda and those collaborations.
All right, very, very quickly. Can I start with Gavi? And I'm going to tag team Vitaly and Maureen to support me on Gavi because I can barely remember everything we discussed. So let me tell you, this joint effort with Gavi and the Global Fund was happening even before we started a conversation with Lusaka. I need to make that very, very clear. Because one of the conversations on the Lusaka agenda was about, Global Fund not willing to do partnerships. Excuse me, we were engaging with this partnership with Gavi before the Lusaka agenda came up, because as a Global Fund board, we recognize the value and importance of teaming up with Gavi to have a stronger malaria response, okay? I want to make that explicitly clear because I think people tend to forget it. The second thing is, I have to say kudos to the Global Fund Secretariat. I have to say kudos to Peter. I also have to say kudos to the Gavi and GFF boards for working together and understanding that this is a process and a collaboration, and they are focused on ensuring that whatever streamlines they do, whatever work that they're going to do jointly will always be transparent and brought to us. And they are focused on the fact that they are here to respond better and collaboratively to the malaria response, okay? I just really, that's very important to know. In terms of the work streams and how the joint working group is going to go, I think, and forgive me, Vitaly and Maureen, you guys are going to have to help me. I think we said that there was a proposed joint working group which would have a member of the strategy committee, would have a member of the AFC, a member of EGC. I think I don't remember off the top of my head, but the point of that joint working group is to allow us to go through the Global Fund processes to ensure that the board is understanding what is happening in that collaboration. I'm going to park that there because I need to tag team you guys on that one. The other thing, guys, everything that we've spoken about in Lusaka agenda for eons now, we presented at the board. From the lack of meaningful inclusion of CSOs and communities in the process, to the actual process, to also when we talk about process, the fact that when you are tabling an issue at the Global Fund board, we have a governance structure, and that process did not go through the Global Fund governance structure in a meaningful way. And I don't know, Katie, if GFAN was able to, if our GFAN folks was able to see the feedback from the ethics governance committee. When the last ethics and governance committee happened in March, they came out and they basically said that this Lusaka agenda was not brought to the Global Fund board following the correct Global Fund processes. And that's important to note. They made that very clear in their findings. That was also brought and presented at the board. In our contributions on the Lusaka agenda, we made it very clear that we don't support it because of this lack of meaningful inclusion of CSOs. And it's okay to apologize for not including us, but it's not okay to not listen and have a strategy and show us how are we going to be meaningfully included every step of the way. One of the things that our delegation made very clear is that we're not focused on another agenda or another declaration or anything. If there are levers from this Lusaka agenda that other partners around the board think will work within our Global Fund strategy to allow us to achieve our mission and to achieve our goals, then fine, let's talk about them in that context of the Global Fund strategy. But we're not talking about the Lusaka agenda. That's my summary of it. We are focused on our strategy, we're focused on our mission, and we're focused on getting us to 2030 and beyond. We recognize the technical expertise around the ground. If people want to suggest different strategies within our duty of care as a Global Fund board to get us our mission, no problem, let's do that. But the conversation is not Lusaka. And the last thing that I would say, this Lusaka agenda was on the agenda as an input. It was not a decision. We do not know how we move forward with it. We just know that we're clear as a board that we are focused on our Global Fund strategy, and we have to strategize to get there and not anything else. So I hope that's a good synopsis for you.
Thank you, Yolanda. I think it is from my perspective, and quickly turn to Vitalia or Maureen if they have anything else they'd like to add. We are almost at the hour, but this is important. So if there's anything else you'd like to add, please go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to be repetitive, but another thing we noticed is that even with the supporters of Lusaka agenda, there's still no consensus of what exactly they want to get. Everyone is looking at it differently. The African delegation was looking at it as a place where they'll have resources, more resources, because they'll be putting one budget, the three ones, one budget. They will not have to what did they say? They don't have to report to multiple donors, so the workload is reduced. And also that they don't have to give counterpart financing to Gavi and into Global Fund and into GFF. They'll only have one pot for counterpart financing. So for them, they were looking at it as offload. And some of the donors were looking at it from now the governments want to take over their health, and therefore it's a process for us to transition out. So there was really no consensus, even for those who are working, who are supporting the agenda. Another one is that we were told by one of the donors that one other issue was that Global Fund, they felt that Global Fund was taken over by communities and civil society. So they want a system where governments can be in charge and can set the direction of the investment. And then another one, we thought that, and I like some of the conclusions for when the session was ending. They were told that if the Lusaka agenda is to help in the principles of the three ones, the governments can have their one plan at the country level, and Global Fund will fund what is relevant for them. And then, so that was a process not to throw the baby with the water, and so with the bathing water. And so what we asked, because we felt that there was this committee, or we know there's this committee that is going to be formed, and we were asking for a sixth shift. Apart from the 5 shifts, we were saying that we want a sixth shift, which should be inclusion of community system strengthening and sustainable community ownership. So, because in those ones, they're all about health system strengthening. There are those that were not supportive of the Lusaka agenda on the basis that it's changing the Global Fund to an RSSH grant, like it's going to be a bilateral with governments where they're focused on health systems and not on people. And so they were kind of they told us to be very cautious around those conversations and bring them more to be about people and not systems. We know the systems work for the people, but they should be about the people. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I wanted to add on top of what Yolanda has said. Thank you.
Very quickly, Maureen, you made an excellent point, because that Lusaka agenda is focused on primary healthcare and a whole heap of other things, but primary healthcare is a responsibility of governments. We, within our strategy, are responsible for HTM, HIV, TB, and malaria. Sorry for the acronym. And that's why it's so important to focus on that as we maximize on our gains. Sorry, Katie.
No, that's okay. And I know we've just gone past the hour. Sometimes I feel like we need to start having 1.5 hour discussions sometimes for our GFAN meetings, but people have other things to do. Noting that there's a number of questions in the chat, and just for everyone, we're sorry that there isn't quite enough time to talk about this in a 1 hour call. I think you might be able to see that even the 3 days of a board meeting doesn't seem to be enough time to discuss all of these things at the board level either, because there is so much detail and so much interconnection between the issues. So I'm just noting for our colleagues from the delegations that there are a few questions. They're specifically more about showcasing where the organizations like Gavi and Global Fund are collaborating already in terms of immunization programs that are both jointly funded from Patty, and there's a couple of other ones there. So if you could have a quick look, what we do after these calls is we will post this presentation that we have, as well as the recording from this call and anything else that we can find that's relevant, that's published at the time that we put that up, including statements that these delegations make and sometimes make available publicly on their websites or Facebook or whatever. And just, I think that there's going to be more conversation here in GFAN as well to reflect the conversations around those big allocation, disease split, eligibility pieces, and just noting that most of the delegations also have some type of public calls at different times as well to connect with all of you as interested community and constituency members. So not the end of our conversations, but it is for today, with apologies and thanks to our colleagues from the 3 delegations and everyone who joined to listen in. Conte, if you just want to put up the last slide, we just wanted to remind you all of a couple of things that are coming up, including a webinar tomorrow related to the UN Summit of the Future and the implications for global health, which is taking place tomorrow, co-organized by us and a number of partners that you see there, and also one next week, May 7th, around transforming global governance and talking about, actually where is civil society in many of these discussions. Again, work done by us, but with a number of amazing partners. So I think that's all we had to say for today. And thank you all for joining us. And Conte has just put the information there. And yes, Vitaly, happy International Workers' Day to everyone who celebrates. You can wish that to me in September. We do ours in September. So thank you, everyone. Thanks to the delegation colleagues. Thanks to everyone, who helped support them over the last few weeks. And we will be sharing a written report as well from GFAN's perspective, probably next week. So thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.